Prayers and blessings, everyone watching. We're reading the book of Ezekiel, and we're on chapter 40. The vision of glory returning to the land, the temple, and the ceremonies of worship. Ezekiel receives a vision of a model temple, beginning with its outer courtyard and gates. In the 25th year of our captivity, in the beginning of the year, in the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year, after that the city was smitten. Until the selfsame day the hand of the Lord was upon me, and brought me thither. And in the vision of God brought me into the land of Israel, and set me upon a very high mountain, by which was as the frame of a city on the south. And he brought me thither, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of brass, with a line of flax in his hand, and a measuring reed, and he stood in the gate. And the man said unto me, Son of man, behold with thine eyes, and hear with thine ears, and set thine heart upon all that I should show thee. For to the intent that I might show them unto thee art thou brought hither. Declare all that thou seest to the house of Israel. And behold, a wall on the outside of the house was round about, and in the man's hand a measuring rod, a measuring reed of 6 cubits long, by the cubit of a hand breadth. So he measured the breadth of the building 1 reed, and the height 1 reed. Then came he unto the gate, which looketh toward the east, and went up the stairs thereof, and measured the threshold of the gate, which was 1 reed broad, and the other threshold of the gate, which was 1 reed broad. And every little chamber was 1 reed long, and 1 reed broad, and between the little chambers were 5 cubits, and the threshold of the gate by the porch of the gate within was 1 reed. He measured also the porch of the gate within 1 reed. Then measured he the porch of the gate 8 cubits, and the post thereof 2 cubits, and the porch of the gate was inward. And the little chambers of the gates eastward were 3 on this side, and 3 on that side. They 3 were of 1 measure, and the posts had 1 measure on the side and on that side, on this side and on that side. And he measured the breadth of the entry of the gate 10 cubits, and the length of the gate 13 cubits. The space also before the little chambers was 1 cubit on this side, and the space was 1 cubit on that side. And the little chambers were 6 cubits on this side and 6 cubits on that side. He measured then the gate from the roof of one little chamber to the roof of another. The breadth was 25 cubits, door against door. He made also posts of 60 cubits, even unto the post of the court, round about the gate, and from the face of the gate of the entrance unto the face of the porch. On the inner gate were 50 cubits. And there were narrow windows to the little chambers and to their posts within the gate round about, and likewise to the arches and windows were round about inward, and upon each post were palm trees. Then brought he me into the outward court, and lo, there were chambers, and a pavement made for the court round about. 30 chambers were upon the pavement, and the pavement by the side of the gates, over against the length of the gates, was the lower pavement. Then he measured the breadth from the forefront of the lower gates unto the forefront of the inner court without 100 cubits eastward and northward. And the gate of the outward court that looked toward the north, he measured the length thereof and the breadth thereof, and the little chambers thereof were 3 on this side and 3 on that side, And the posts thereof and the arches thereof were after the measure of the first gate. The length thereof was 50 cubits, and the breadth 25 cubits. And their windows and their arches and their palm trees were after the measure of the gate that looketh toward the east. And they went up into it by 7 steps, and the arches thereof were before them. And the gate of the inner court was over against the gate toward the north and toward the east, and he measured from gate to gate 100 cubits. After that he brought me toward the south, and behold, a gate toward the south, and he measured the posts thereof and the arches thereof according to these measures. And there were windows in it, and in the arches thereof round about, like those windows, the length was 50 cubits, and the breadth 25 cubits. And they were 7 steps to go up to it, and the arches thereof were before them. And it had palm trees, one on this side and another on that side, upon the post thereof. And there was a gate in the inner court toward the south, and he measured from gate to gate toward the south 100 cubits. And he brought me to the inner court by the south gate, and he measured the south gate according to these measures. And the little chambers thereof, as the posts thereof, and the arches thereof, according to these measures. And there were windows in it, and the arches thereof round about. It was 50 cubits long, and 25 cubits broad. And the arches round about were 25 cubits long, and 5 cubits broad. And the arches thereof were toward the outer court, and the palm trees were upon the posts thereof. And the going up to it had 8 steps. And he brought me into the inner court toward the east, and he measured the gate according to these measures. And the little chambers thereof, and the posts thereof, and the arches thereof were according to these measures. And there were windows therein, and in the arches thereof round about. It was 50 cubits long, and 25 cubits broad. And the arches thereof were toward the outward court, and the palm trees were upon the posts thereof, on this side and on that side. And the going up to it had 8 steps. And he brought me to the north gate, and measured it according to these measures. The little chamber thereof, the posts thereof, and the arches thereof, and the windows to it round about, the length was 50 cubits, and the breadth 25 cubits. And the posts thereof were toward the utter court, and the palm trees were upon the posts thereof, on this side and on that side. And the going up to it had 8 steps. And the chambers and the entries thereof were by the post of the gates, where they washed and at the burnt the burnt offering. And in the porch of the gate were 2 tables on this side, and 2 tables on that side, to slay thereon the burnt offering, and the sin offering, and the trespass offering. And on the side without, as one goeth up to the entry of the north gate, were 2 tables, and on the other side, which was at the porch of the gate, were 2 tables. 4 tables were on this side, 4 tables on that side. By the side of the gate 8 tables, whereupon they slew their sacrifices. And the 4 tables were of hewn stone for the burnt offering, of 1.5 cubits long, and 1.5 cubits broad, and 1 cubit high. Whereupon also they laid their instruments, wherewith they slew the burnt offering and the sacrifice. And written were books, and hand broad, fastened round about, and upon the tables was the flesh of the offering. And without the inner gate were the chambers of the singers in the in the inner court, which was at the side of the north gate, and their prospect was toward the south. One at the side of the east gate, having the prospect toward the north. And he said unto thee, This chamber, whose prospect is toward the south, is for the priests, the keepers of the charge of the house. And the chamber whose prospect is toward the north is for the priests, the keepers of the charge of the altar. These are the sons of Zadok among the sons of Levi, which come near to the Lord to minister unto him. So he measured the court, 100 cubits long and 100 cubits broad, 4 square, and the altar that was before the house. And he brought me to the porch of the house, and measured each post of the porch 5 cubits on this side, and 5 cubits on that side. And the breadth of the gate was 3 cubits on this side, and 3 cubits on that side. The length of the porch was 20 cubits, and the breadth 11 cubits. And he brought me by the steps whereby they went up to it. And there were pillars by the posts, one on this side, another on that side. It reminds me of reading, is it Numbers or Kings, where they explain about Deuteronomy, where they explain about the temple that was built, that's I think Solomon built, or Solomon. Okay, we'll read the notes for this. 25 year of our captivity, 20 years after Ezekiel's ministry began, approximately 572 BC. The city Jerusalem, which had lain in ruins with its temple destroyed for 14 years. Visions of God, the mode of the revelation from God, often involves symbolic images on various approaches to chapters 40-48. See in indoctrination. Introduction. Major problems of interpretation. Ezekiel's vision of a new temple and the land into the land of Israel was not physically, but as part of a vision. Very high mountain, a symbol of God's kingdom. John used similar language of his vision of the New Jerusalem. Frame, structure, brass, bronze, line of flax, a cord of thread, twine, measuring reed, a rod for measuring. Cubits, a cubit measured approximately 18 inches, but these cubits were extended by a handbreadth or 3 inches. So 1 reed or 6 of such cubits was about 10.5 feet throughout the whole section. Measuring the dimension of this visionary temple communicates God's careful attention to his people to guarantee their hope and holiness. Little chamber, apartment or guard room, porch, vestibule, posts, doors, posts or pillars, 1 measure at the same length, empty opening or entrance, space, boundary, territory or space, posts, pillars or doors, doorposts, court, enclosure, face, the front of, narrow, literally closed, signifying small arches, porches, vestibules or galleries throughout the whole section, chambers, rooms, over, against, alongside or parallel to, outer, entries, opening or doorways, burnt offerings, the animal for the burnt offering, hewn, cut instruments, implements or utensils, hooks, lips or hook-shaped pegs, prospect, face the direction they faced, the keepers of the charge of the house, those with responsibility to keep the temple, the keepers of the charge of the altar, those with responsibility to keep and tend to the altar, sons of Zadok, the priestly family. Thoughts for personal family worship. As a godly man of the priestly line, Ezekiel must have been deeply distressed at his vision of the departure of God's glory from the temple, and the news that the holy city had been destroyed. God's special presence with Israel distinguished them from all other nations and was the life and joy of the godly. The vision of measuring out a new temple would have filled him with hope, for it was a pledge that God would see to everything necessary, that his presence would remain forever with his people. However, God was not concerned about buildings, for he had received that his presence would dwell in the spirit, in a transformed heart. The meaning of the vision lies in its symbolism of God's restored presence with his worshippers. What does it mean to hope in and seek after God's spiritual presence? Chapter 41. Ezekiel's vision of a new temple continues as he stands in their inner court and hears the measuring of the holy places. Afterward he brought me to the temple and measured the posts 6 cubits broad on one side and 6 cubits broad on the other side, which was the breadth of the tabernacle. And the breadth of the door was 10 cubits, and the sides of the door were 5 cubits on one side and 5 cubits on the other side. And he measured the length thereof 40 cubits, and the breadth 20 cubits. Then went he inward and measured the posts on the door 2 cubits, and the door 6 cubits, and the breadth of the door 6 cubits. So he measured the length thereof 20 cubits, and the breadth 20 cubits before the temple. And he said unto me, This is the most holy place. After he measured the wall of the house 6 cubits, and the breadth of every side chamber 4 cubits, round about the house on every side. Then the side chambers were 3, one over another, and 30 in order. And they entered into the wall, which was of the house, for the side chambers round about, that they might have hold. But they had not hold in the wall of the house. And there was an enlarging and a winding about still upward to the side chambers, for the winding about of the house went still upward round about the house. Therefore the breadth of the house was still upward, and so increased from the lowest chamber to the highest by the midst. I also saw the height of the house round about. The foundations of the side chambers were a full reed of 6 great cubits. The thickest of the wall, which was for the side chamber without, was 5 cubits, and that which was left was the place of the side chambers that were within. And between the chambers was the wideness of 20 cubits round about the house on every side. And the doors of the side chambers were toward the place that was left, one door toward the north, and another door toward the south. And the breadth of the place that was left was 5 cubits round about. Now this building that was before the separate place at the end toward the west was 70 cubits broad, and the wall of the building was 5 cubits thick round about, and the length thereof 90 cubits. So he measured the house 100 cubits long, and the separate place, and the building with the walls thereof 100 cubits long. Also the breadth of the face of the house and of the separate place toward the east 100 cubits. And he measured the length of the building over again, the separate place which was behind it, and the galleys thereof on one side and on the other side, 100 cubits, with the inner temple and the porches of the court. The doorposts and the narrow windows and the galleries round about on their 3 stories, over against the door, circled with wood round about, and from the ground up to the windows, and the windows were covered, so that above the door, even unto the inner house and without, and by all the wall round about, within and without, by measure. And it was made with cherubims and palm trees, so that the palm tree was between a cherub, and every cherub had 2 faces, so that the face of a man was toward the palm tree on one side, and the face of a young lion toward the palm tree on the other side. It was made through all the house round about. From the ground unto the door were cherubims and palm trees made, and on the wall of the temple. The post of the temple was squared, and the face of the sanctuary, the appearance of the one as the appearance of the other. The altar of wood was 3 cubits high, and the length thereof 2 cubits, and the corners thereof, and the length thereof, and the walls thereof were of wood. And he said unto me, This is the table that is before the Lord. And the temple and the sanctuary had 2 doors, and the doors had 2 leaves apiece, 2 turning leaves, 2 leaves for the one door, and 2 leaves for the other door. And there were made on them, on the doors of the temple, cherubims and palm trees, like as were made upon the walls. And there were thick planks upon the face of the porch without. And there were narrow windows and palm trees on the one side and on the other side, and on the sides of the porch and upon the side chambers of the house, and thick planks. 41. Ezekiel's vision of a new temple continues as he stands in the inner court and hears the measuring of the holy place. Temple can designate the main room as well as the whole temple, tabernacle, dwelling place. Door, the opening or entrance throughout the chapter, inward, inside, most holy place, the center point of God's holy presence, built as a perfect 30-foot cube. Kings, chambers, room throughout the chapter have hold, be made secure or fastened, enlarging, widening on the way up, winding, most likely a winding staircase. A separate place, a cut out place, signifying the holiest place, face of, the front of. Galleries, walkways with pillars, sealed, covered or overlaid. Cherubims, angelic beings. Palm trees, symbols of flourishing life in God's presence, perhaps alluding to the Garden of Eden. These trees appear 13 times. Squared, made square. Walls the size of the altars. Walls the size of the altars of the altar. 2 leaves, 2 doors to each door opening. Thoughts for personal family worship. The symbolism of the holy place in the new temple would have reminded Ezekiel that God, who dwells with his people in the holy, is the holy king, whose servants are mighty spirits. His presence inspires fear and awe and commands reverence. Yet the images of palm trees frequently appearing in the vision imply that his holiness does not bring death to his people, but abundant life. This is the hope of believers, that the Lord God will so dwell among them by the Spirit that they will rejoice with trembling. How will this hope be gloriously fulfilled when Christ returns? And we've got enough time to read 42. Ezekiel hears of chambers in the outer court of the temple and observes the measuring and the whole temple complex. Then he brought me forth into the utter court, the way toward the north, and he brought me into the chamber that was over against the separate place, and which was before the building toward the north. Before the length of 100 cubits was the north door, and the breadth was 50 cubits, over against the 20 cubits, which were for the inner court, and over against the pavement, which were for the outer court, and gallery against gallery in 3 stories. And before the chambers was a walk of 10 cubits, breadth inward, a way of 1 cubit, and their doors toward the north. Now the upper chambers were shorter, for the galleries were higher than these, than the lower, and than the middlemost of the building, for they were in 3 stories. He had not pillars as the pillars of the courts. Therefore the building was straightened more than the lowest and the middlemost from the ground. And the wall that was without over against the chambers toward the utter court on the forepart of the chambers, the length thereof was 50 cubits. For the length of the chambers that were in the utter court was 50 cubits, and lo, before the temple were 100 cubits. And from under these chambers was the entry on the east side, as one goeth into them from the outer court. The chambers were in the thickness of the wall of the court toward the east, over against the separate place, and over against the building. And the way before them was like the appearance of the chambers, which were toward the north, as long as they, and as broad as they. And all their goings out were both according to their fashions, and according to their doors. And according to the doors of the chambers that were toward the south was a door in the head of the way, even the way directly before the wall toward the east, as one entereth into them. Then said he unto me, the north chambers and the south chambers, which are before the separate place, they be holy chambers, where the priests that approach unto the Lord shall eat the most holy things. There shall they lay the most holy things, and the meat offerings, and the sin offering, and the trespass offering, for the place is holy. When the priests enter therein, then shall they not go out of the holy place into the utter court, but there they shall lay their garments wherein they minister, for they are holy, and shall put on other garments, and shall approach to those things which are for the people. Now when he made an end of measuring an inner house, he brought me forth toward the gate, whose prospect is toward the east, and measured it round about. He measured the east side with the measuring reed, 500 reeds, and the measuring reed 5 round about. He measured the north side, 500 reeds, and the measuring reed round about. He measured the south side, 500 reeds, and the measuring reed, with the measuring reed. He turned about to the west side, and measured 500 reeds, and the measuring reed, with the measuring reed. He measured it by the 4 sides, and it had a wall round about, 500 reeds long, and 500 broad, to make a separation between the sanctuary and the profane place. Ezekiel hears of the chambers in the outer court of the temple and observes the measuring of the whole temple complex, outer, throughout the section chamber, room, used in the work of the priests and Levites. Separate place, either a place in the courtyard or the most holy place. Gallery against gallery in 3 stories. Porches in all 3 levels. A place to walk. Straightened, recessed or narrowed on the 4 parts in front of, in the thickness of the wall, in all the expanse or breadth of the wall. Fashions, its plans. Eat the most holy things. The priests were permitted to eat portions of the offerings brought to God for their own sustenance. Prospects is toward the east, facing east. Profane place, a common area, not set apart as holy. Thoughts for personal family worship. The temple, including its courts, was a holy space that was separated from the common. Yet this was a place of human activity, requiring chambers for God's servants to work and to eat the holy food of their portion of the offerings. These aspects on Ezekiel's vision would have assured him that God would not only give his presence, but would also provide for the needs of the ministers who would serve him there. This reminds us that the cherub must provide for the physical needs. This reminds us that the church must provide for the physical needs of its pastors. It also reminds us that God provides for his priesthood. The priests of Aaron's line had largely failed to honour the Lord. But in Christ, God's people have all become priests who eat from the benefits of Christ's sacrifice. How does God feed his people with his holy things as they worship him today? Yeah, we're pretty much out of time now. 42. So yeah, that was quite a hard read, especially in this light. I'm sure that Chuck Missler can shed some sort of educational light on that, and I'm sure that the measurements, from just reading them, from being a builder, it sounded to me like it was perfectly symmetrical. Everything was very, very organised and very symmetrical. As a builder, just reading it, but I'm sure that the exact measurements mean something as well. Like there was 25 and 50, so 100, so it was all very square, cubic, kind of symmetrical measurements. But I'm sure that if we watch Chuck Missler's study on that chapter, he will enlighten us as to what that actually means. So yeah, just I linked a load of study to that last three, the last three chapters, 47, 48 and 49, which was about Gog and Magog. And I had such a revelation. A lot of things that I've been studying the last few months, it's all tied in. And if we watch Chuck Missler, he explains the history of this area, this area where God comes from. He's going to come from. And it's basically the same area of where all this is happening now in the Ukraine. So it's very relevant. It's very, very relevant. So we need to keep an eye on this part of the world. And why is it, that NATO and all these, this unholy alliance, this Luciferian alliance, is so interested in this part of the world? I've even heard of talks of the Zionists wanting to emigrate back to or into Ukraine. So because they almost know that it's going to get crazy in the Middle East. Because I think they'll be part of the ones inciting the attack on Israel. I mean, look at what they're doing to their own people now with the injections, and that it's just crazy, isn't it? So I think we need to keep an eye on this part of the world. Maybe do a little bit of research on the history. I've done a lot of research on this Khazar tribe, which is the same area basically. You can go back as far as Genghis Khan, even before that. So it's very, very interesting, and that they converted to Judaism as well. So I'll let you do your own research on that. I linked a lot of videos on the last session. Chuck Missler, absolutely blessed. So thank you for listening. God bless. Bye bye.